Yes. Okay. Give me just a moment here. How about chat? And here I am. Welcome everyone to my show. Yay! Now, tonight, the first portion, not sure how long it'll take, is going to be dedicated to detailing the figure that I sculpted back on Sunday. Hi, TJ. The second half, or the second portion, I'll be doing a little bit of painting. And yes, I will be painting those figures that I have been printing for my Kickstarter. And to make it a little bit easier, I have my smartphone set up right over here as a second webcam. I can't guarantee the quality. It's a mid-tier LG. Go figure. But it's a camera, and I have a light over here, really bright. You can see how bright my hand is. That's focused on the painting. In fact, let me go ahead and there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait until 8 o'clock or when Danny shows up, whichever comes first, before I start in on detailing his kitty cat. Okay? Meanwhile, plans for the next few episodes. Well, you really can't quite see too well up here, but I mean, I've got a lot of unprimed miniatures. I've got some half-painted miniatures, and I've got a few regular miniatures. I mean, I've even got the table and benches, Viking style. That's intended for the mead hall. Yeah, I know he's around, I don't know if he's in here yet. Meanwhile, for those of you who are watching after the fact on YouTube, don't forget, like, subscribe, and bell icon, that whole usual rigmarole, and any cubic photon is like outstanding quality stuff. So, but my plan is, over the next few weeks, I'm going to, or probably next couple of weeks, probably be done by after a couple of weeks, I'm going to be painting as many of those as I can, and at the very least getting them primed. I mean, for those, you may have seen this one the other day. I call him the cratered one, because he kind of got, it's kind of like the opposite of Kratos. He got cratered. Split. At the very least, I'm going to get them primed. And hopefully they'll get, I'll get at least the base coats on before I do the photos for the Kickstarter. So I'm getting closer. We're getting very close. And there's at least one person watching right now who's not speaking up in chat. I wonder who it is. Anyway, enough of that for right now. It's 7:59 by my clock, and so here in just a minute or so, we're going to be popping over to ZBrush, and I'll get started on sculpting. Now, for some reason, this book is still sitting over there. For those who are unfamiliar, this book is a godsend when making critters. Bone, muscle, the whole 9 yards. I do not use this to make miniatures or drawings of cows and horses and cats and lions and dogs. No, I mix and match to make bestial critters, like my hunting drake. No, Ice Wolf, you're not Danny. This is not the viewer you're looking for. And before we go, simple sip of soda. You know, there's only one print that I've done that I use anywhere near as often as the mug. That's this. Oh, yeah. I got my dice, pencils and pens, life counters, miniatures. Yeah, and ow, pinch. A slot from my tablet, and of course, it's a dice tower. Yeah. I've used that ever since I first designed it and got it printed. Yeah, I rarely print things that other people design. I printed the bed strain relief kit bracket for the CR10. I think that's almost it. Oh, and a feeder thing that uses a PTFE tube about that long to help minimize the rubbing of the filament against the... Hold on a second. I got some cats that are being a bit rambunctious. Sorry about that. I had both cats deciding they both wanted to be in the dirty clothes hamper at the same time. Yes, cats love the dirty clothes hamper because it smells like us. Yay. Okay, so I guess the next thing I'm going to do is, despite the fact that he's not here yet, and here we are. This is what I had as of end of show Sunday. As you can see, there's still quite a bit left to do on him. So, for example, I'm going to start off by doing something very simple. I'm going to go up to the chain, which, by the way, needs to be pushed down. And I'm going to use the move brush, not the move topological, the move. And I'm going to kind of pull it in a bit this way. So it's going under the connect. It's connecting at the brooch, not on top of the brooch. There we go. Now the next thing is, we're going to hide almost everything except for the body. And we're going to start working on his toesies. Because kitties need toesies. Actually, we're going to make the foot pieces visible just so I can see where to put the toesies. We're also going to hide the bits of the tail just to make it easier to sculpt. And for all of this, I need my tabby. Oh, cord's all tangled up. Isn't that wonderful? Get this up from under. Yeah. Yay. Okay. Tablet into lap. And stylus. Now before I do any of this, I'm going to go to stroke and put that over here so I can turn off any lazy mouse maneuvers I need to. Now the first thing we're going to start with is a slash tool. Okay. Actually no, we're not going to start with slash, we're going to start with clay buildup. We're going to switch to the round alpha. Shrink the size a bit. And turn on that button here. This button here means that each brush has a different size and it remembers. The exception to this would be things that use control, like masking, and shift, like smoothing. But anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build up where the claws are. And that, I need to make it a little bit bigger. Well, yeah. It's going to be 4 claws, which means use that move tool to grab the toe and make it a little bit wider. And we're going to go to the back to clay buildup and we're going to make it a little bit smaller. Okay. Now just one quick slash on where each of them is going to be. Okay. So I need a little bit closer over here. Okay, now we're going to build up the claw. It doesn't have to be an actual claw. The detail level in this is so small at this point that all we need is just a little bit of differential. And then we go to slash. I'm going to shrink the mouse again, and with a low intensity kind of just go over where the claws are, because it'll help smooth them out and shape them where we need them. And we want the slash to be about there. Turn off lazy mouse and reduce the intensity to about 15. And come in between the toes. There. And then smooth. Let's increase the intensity just a little bit. Then I'm going to very gently draw over the top of the claws to kind of emphasize where they're coming out of. Okay, just to show you the difference between those paws and the paws on the other foot. It's just it's not a huge difference in terms of proportion, but the tiny little details really add to it. Same reason that we detail the hand, even though most of it's not going to be seen, it helps affect the overall volume of the hand. And we're going to drag, actually we need to start from here and kind of drag it this way, because we need to make sure it stays near the front. Okay. Okay, make sure it's about as wide, that's about as good. And we're going to go back to clay buildup. I'm going to zoom in. We're going to go here just to mark off where they are. Okay, and then we're going to kind of build up the actual claws. And a very light over top of them. And then back to slash and slash up, 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 and then smooth out where they are here. And finally kind of come over. Frame out. And our paws are pawed. We didn't have to put it on, we didn't have to pause our production for this. And we can put the tail back on. And now we go out here and we start looking, okay, the next thing to detail. Chain's good. Those are good. The belt's good. That's good. Oh look, the cloak. We need to detail the cloak. And the only thing we need for this is the cloak itself. The underside we're not going to really worry too much about. The rest of it we're going to actually excuse me. We're going to start off we're going to use these okay, and then we're going to kind of bring it in here. Seeing as it's a heavy cloak, it's not going to have as many wrinkles per square inch as the soft cloth, no matter what Games Workshop thinks with all of their incredibly wrinkly, super wrinkly cloaks. Then we're going to switch to add. We're going to drop it down to about 7. And we're going to draw on a sharper bottom to each of these wrinkles. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. And down here, and then we're going to come over here. That's all we really need to do for the cloak. Most of what we're going to be doing today is going to be on the body, because that's where most of his clothing is. And then comes weapons. No, don't need the cloak, don't need that. Okay, we're going to turn on that. And we're going to go ahead and let's turn off the cloak completely. We're going to keep the belt on just so we can see where the wrinkles need to be. And hello Kim, and hello Emilio, and hello Mark. Yes, we are finishing Danny's catfolk, and then I'm going to be painting while talking to y'all. Okay? Alright, so what we need to do now, we're going to use the build-up brush for some of these wrinkles. And we're going to need to make it really big and really light. because we need to change how this is shaped. For example, right along here, you kind of come down from here. This will help us get exactly what we need. And also to get an eye on where we need to be. For example, this, we need to come this way with these compression wrinkles. And then coming from up here. Okay, and then just kind of drawing on the basics of where these will be. We're going to detail them further with the slash brush. Okay. Okay, now back to slash. We're going to switch back to sub, raise it up again, and drop the draw size. We're just going to kind of just draw in where these wrinkles really need to follow. For example, right in here we had a problem with a wrinkle going in the wrong direction. There we go. Oh. And we're going to smooth out this area here because it doesn't need to have as many wrinkles. It's going to be a little bit tighter than what is shown. So I'm going to do is there. And apparently Mom's watching, of all things, one of those old Andy Hardy movies when she was a little kid. Good for her. Alright, and now we're going to go back to add and drop it down to about 7. No, about 9. We're going to make it a little bit bigger too, and then we're just going to kind of draw on the tops of these wrinkles as usual. Wrong. There we go. I know. Okay, and then come in like this. Only a couple bits. You remember, there's a lot of this back stuff will end up getting covered up by the cloak anyway. Frame out. Now we look just real quick to see what else there is we need to do to him, because there usually is a little bit left that we always forget. Okay. Actually, it looks like there may not be much else to do on him. Let's frame out to full size. This is our critter. Zoom out a little bit. Let's see how he looks at small size. He still looks excellent. That's good to see. Nothing is too small of a detail. You can make out the toe claws. You can make out the gap, the wraps. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. Is Danny in yet? No, no Danny. Oh, that is excellent, Kim. That is good to hear. Okay. Now we're going to go back up to him, and we're going to start merging down. Because it is now time to fuse him into a single solid mass. Okay. So let me put this back up over here. Put the tablet, put the stylus up. Alright. Zoom out. And geometry. Dynamesh. 1034. Okay. Now if you'll look, while the figure himself is off balance and very dashingly forward, 90% of the mass is directly over the base. So he's not exactly going to fall over. It's not as bad as that one crazy wizard miniature I did. Well, now we need to go up here to Z plug in and go to Decimation Master. And we're going to do them at a pretty heavy polygon count for this. We want to make sure all our details are good. We're going to do them at 100,000 polygons. And in case you see me leaning down, it's... Where is my... There it is. I was preparing to get this print. Trying to get it all nice and right nice and proper. I actually stopped the print a millimeter too early because I thought it was failing. It wasn't. But I'm still going to go ahead and... This is good. It's good enough that I can go ahead and cure it. I usually partially cure it, then remove the supports, then cure the rest of it. And that's actually in 3 parts glued together to make the little fallen building. And it looks like it's going to succeed on the first try. Yay! And it goes from 3481 to 113,000 or 101,784 polygons. It is a single solid mesh ready for printing. Well, needs a little bit of cleanup, but it's mostly ready for printing. So I'm going to export this to Danny's catful figure.obj. Alrighty. What do I do that for? There we go. Well, to be honest, Taylor, that's one of the better ways to handle a dual-wielding scenario in a more realistic environment. Because unless you are perfectly ambidextrous, or at least perfectly large-scale ambidextrous, your left hand or otherwise offhand weapon is best done as a defensive weapon. You hold it low as a guard to go in and parry. Uh-oh, that's going to fall if I leave it there. No. There we go. So just as an example, just to pull off a couple random things. Fighting like this, assuming that this is your one sword and this is your offhand. You just side to side to parry. Occasionally a thrust or a slash, but this is your primary offense and this is your primary defense. Yep. Well, yeah, it looks cool too, especially when you've got unusual weapons like that. Now, I don't know if Danny is in here and just waiting and watching, but yeah, we're going to be switching now to, excuse me, this. Got a couple miniatures here. Let me go ahead and give it one level of, or a couple levels of light so I can see. Yeah. That is Beowulf, and this is Roland the Paladin. And that's what I'm going to be painting tonight. Now, it'll be kind of hard to see, mostly because I've got a crap smartphone. Let me go ahead and... There we go. This has only one coat on the flesh. Or it has two coats, rather. There's a couple areas, like right around this back muscle here, that it looks gray. So let's go ahead and what I do, I take the paint. In this case, this is Army Painter Tan Flesh, and shake it, shake it, shake it, and yeah, ain't that cool? I take it, I have a piece of paper down here. I'm just going to drop a single drop, oh, 2 drops actually, because I need to make sure I cover a decent amount. 1, too. I do not use this paint directly. Instead, this is added to it. Let me go ahead and move this out of the way so you can see the droplets of paint. Some of you may have heard of Lamin Medium from Games Workshop. Lamin Medium costs way too much for what it does. A typical bottle about 2/3 the size of this bottle. This is, of course, the infamous Agrax Earthshade. But a bottle about 2/3 the size of this costs about $4, almost $5 of Lamin Medium, and it contains 12 milliliter. This is 237 milliliters. As you can see, it says right there. And that 237 milliliters cost me $12. And it's exactly the same thing. So I got 2 drops there. I'm going to go ahead and add 1 drop of this medium. What that does, that makes it a little bit thinner and a little bit more translucent, simply for the fact of, you want a thinner and multiple layer for your for when you're painting. This is a mixture of distilled water and vegetable glycerin. Just a little bit of vegetable glycerin, and what it does, it breaks the surface tension on the water. Now, I'm going to take this brush, mix this up a little bit, be nice and thin. And I'm going to go ahead, and by thinning this down, not only does it get rid of any and all brush strokes from when you're painting, it also keeps it from clogging up on detail, like, for example, the chainmail around Orlando's torso and arms, and the feathered eagle patterns he's got. Now, I'm a little bit sloppy usually with my very first color, and on anybody with skin, I always paint the skin first. Simply because anything else would be below the skin. And even though I'm painting this... there's 3 tiers to a paint job, you might say. There's getting it on the table. There's using it for display. For example, Games Workshop having some figures painted up to put in their displays at the battle bunker. And there's painting it to your absolute very best for competition. This obviously is going to be kind of in between the second and third, because I want it to be better than just display. But I'm not going to have the time to do full competition standards and have all of this done in time of getting a Kickstarter done in anything remotely resembling a reasonable time. Now, Roland has a lot less skin visible and a lot more metal, simply because he's not a fantasy Norseman. I should also note that I did not make these characters based on actual history. If I did, Beowulf would be a lot more boring, He'd be wearing breeches and a tunic and a male shirt, and that'd be it. And Orlando here, Roland, would be dressed in basically male and a helmet. Now, I am painting Roland and Beowulf. By the way, these little craft paint bottles make excellent handles. I just put a little bit of blue tack on top of them and mush the miniature down. I prime them on there and I leave them on this little handle thingy until it's done. Now the thing is, right now, I put the final coat of the base flesh tone, the tanned flesh, on both of these figures. Now what that does, they need to dry. Until they're dry, I can't do anything else. Now, meanwhile, since we're kind of, since Danny has just shown up, I need to show you the finale. Okay. I went ahead and finished him. So, well, no, that stays there. That goes away. Yeah. And here is your Catman. Got little claws on his toesies. He's got his wrinkly clothing. He's got the chain in the proper position for the brooches. His hands are done. And he's pretty much ready for the printing. Aww. Yeah, what do you think of that? So anyway, as you can see, little Shinju is just sound asleep. It normally takes a few minutes for this thinned down paint to dry. But what it does, like I said, you end up with literally 0 brush strokes. It doesn't clog into any of the detailing, such as the face or the fingers or the chainmail. And you end up with some really nice surfaces. The next thing we're going to be doing is actually we're going to be doing the wash, which will be, again, because this is not competition level, Army Painter flesh wash. So, what we're going to be doing with the Army Painter flesh wash, I'm going to be putting a little bit somewhere on the little paper here, and I'm going to be doing a thin coat, only in the grooves. Except most of the face will get covered in it because there's a lot of detailing. Most of the hands will get covered in it. And then, once that dries, it'll be time to start adding in the layers. Now, I've set up a little diagram here. Pull up that picture. Where did I put it? Put it on the desktop. Yeah, here it is. Alright, you see this right here. Alright, what's going on here? On the top left is your base, the level of what you would do for your basic, get it on the table so you can play. You would paint it that medium shade, the middle shade. Give it a wash of the dark shade and then a dry brush of the light. Or you paint it the dark shade, you give it a heavy coat of the, not quite dry brush, but not quite actual coat of the medium, and then a dry brush of the light. That's enough to just get it on the table. The one next to it, further to the right, is you do the same thing but with more layers. You're trying to make it less of a big old jagged steps between them. And that's what a lot of people will do, is instead of just, using technique, they'll use just multiple layers of paint. And in fact, I confess to doing this myself on multiple occasions. Now, the one right here, the one below, is my representation of what happens if you do a glaze over top of the base color. It smooths out the shading somewhat, but it can also reduce the contrast between the light and the dark. And then finally, on the far right over here on the bottom, you have any one of the more advanced techniques, like wet blending, or, doing the same thing as multiple layers above, but using thinned down layers and using multiple, to the point where, for example, I've heard of one person that used 12 layers of red over a medium dark red. Well, let me hide this. You can see the difference here, can't you? Not a huge difference between these reds, but they use 12 layers to go from the dark red to the lighter red. Like I said, that's not even a true red, that's a dragon red. There we go, that's a true red. There's a bit of a difference here, a bit more difference. But yeah, so what I'm doing is the next couple weeks I'm going to be painting during my shows. Because, I want to make sure that I get these looking good. Alright, now let's glance again at Beowulf. He's got the most surface area, so he's most likely to take a while to dry. Okay, not too much longer. Now, you'll notice that these guys are gray. My usual shtick is I'll paint the figure with a spray gray primer, and then I'll give it a dry brush of a lighter gray. I didn't do that for these guys simply because that's really only what I do for figures that are going to be seen unpainted for a while, or undetail painted, like the figures from my Wednesday night game. Okay, how's he coming? He's still got a damp layer. You have to make sure these dry completely, because with that medium and the accelerated water, I guess you could call it, it takes longer. It actually slows down the drying process. Now, just as an example, let me reach up here. Let's say I was going to do your basic orc skin for a tabletop game. Just a tabletop orc. What I would do is I would have these three paints. The base color, a shade, and a highlight. I'd paint it the base color. I'd give it a wash of the shade. I'd dry brush it pretty heavily with the base color again, and then give it a touch up on the highest points with the light color. For a display version, I would actually sit there and either use a paint that's in between or mix the colors to get in between shades, and try to at least get them a little bit blended using glazes or that. For competition, I'd be sitting there for hours trying to wet blend and trying to actually mix the colors on the miniature itself. Some of you may have heard of a man named John Blanche. John Blanche was one of the big-time miniature painters and artists for Games Workshop in the late 70s through the 80s. He designed the look of 40K. He designed the earliest versions of the Space Marine armor, the Orc tech, the Eldar. All of that was John Blanch's work. He also started painting miniatures with oil paints, which is where he developed the technique of mixing the colors on the miniature itself. Now, I'm not going to go that far with these guys. These are not for a contest. These are going to be photographed. And photography can cover a myriad of sins. For example, if I discover that, oh no, I really screwed up his back, well, I just have to make sure to only take photographs from the front and side. I am a font of useless historical information. Also, I am loving the paint selections now. And I don't just mean the selections within any given, any given line. I mean, look at this. I mean the different brands that are available. When I started painting miniatures, you had Partha paints, Armory, Citadel, which were actually relatively new, and there was another brand, I can't remember what they were called, but they were little glass bottles. They were water-based, but they were as thick as paste. And nobody even had any clue about thinning back then. Also, back then, and if it wasn't Citadel, 9 times out of 10, the pigments were almost as large and rough as this. You try to do a wash on them, and you'd end up with those coffee ring stains at the tops of your ridges and that. Alright, let's take a look. Is he still drying? Okay, he's a little shiny. He's got a couple areas near his belt that are still a little bit damp. One other thing about thinning down the paint like this, it does tend to occasionally get a little bit shinier. Okay. You gotta look carefully at all the crevices to make sure they're not shinier than the rest. Because where the crevices are is where you want your washes to go. But if the crevices aren't dry yet, when you go to put it on, it's just going to get cloudy. Now, we go ahead and pull out. Where did I put it? Oh, there he is. What some of you may not realize is that, this is my character on my Wednesday game. There we go. It's better that way. Come on. Anyway, I can't get it to focus perfectly. This lighting is horrible for showing them on the screen, but it's really good for actual painting. And yes, I'll admit I'm kind of stalling a little bit with this random nonsense. Y'all haven't seen these guys yet, but I've also finished modeling and printing some Saracens to be kind of enemies of Roland, and allies of the giant Farragut. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got him actually in my game case book because I use him on Wednesday nights. Primed and dry brushed. Mm-hmm. Ugh. I swear I love that photon. As I pull up a card maneuver and straighten my shirt. Shouldn't be too much longer for and I think he's done. Again, he didn't have as much on him. I'm just going to give him... He won't need as much paint. Always, always shake them up. I don't care if you just used it 5 minutes ago. Shake it up and have a an agitator in there. Now, there's a lot of bubbles in here, but those bubbles go away when it becomes a full drop. And with this guy, we only need 1 drop because it's a small amount of flesh. Okay. Now, let's start off. I'm just going to paint across the face, making certain that I don't leave any bubbles behind. If you leave a lot of bubbles behind when you paint on a wash, that's usually because you're using an older brush and it's got an irregular surface. I'm going to try and leave behind a little bit of a stain right about there. Now, we're going to do the same thing on the hands. You probably can't see me doing it because of the little flag on here. But I'm making sure just to cover at least a very light coat over the entirety of the hands. And then letting it soak in and leave little, not quite puddles, but sink into the gaps where there is a detail like between the fingers or around the thumb. Like I said, using this as a handle, you can plant your hand on it for if you're doing detail work, or just be able to pivot it around, maneuver it while you're doing other work. You don't have to use a paint bottle. There are actual tools out there that you can use, including one from Games Workshop that clamps onto the miniature base. I'm just not a huge fan of it simply because I can do this. Okay. Now it'll take just a few minutes for that to the water that I use. You know, first of all, this is a tiny little plastic cup. The water has a small drop of washing liquid in it, just to kind of help break up tension and get the paint off the brush easier. I don't use this water to make a wash with. I have this thing. You guys have a large mix I need to make. And hello, Todd. What I use for washes and other really liquid things, you know, washes, inks, that sort of thing, I use little glass beads I got from Michael's. for the thicker ones, like the actual paints, I have stainless steel nuts. Yes, nuts, like, hex nuts. Not hex nuts, but just, nuts and bolts nuts. About 3 millimeters. I put 2 in each bottle. Since they're stainless steel, they don't rust, and therefore they don't corrupt the paint. Now, like I was saying about some of those old paint sets, for the longest time, okay, see ya, Danny, and DM me the email address you want me to send the files to, okay? But yeah, good old Games Workshop, long before this type of bottle, used to be the only game in town if you wanted really good paint. I mean, if you were going to just paint a base coat and dry brush, you could use Armory, you could use Partha paints, whatever, because that's 90% of people just did that. And nowadays, still 90% of people just do that. Okay, you want me to post it on Thingiverse? Alright. Normally, the Patreon sculpts I have only in the Patreon file vault, but if you want them on Thingiverse, I'll do it. I'll link you the way you link me. Cool. Anyway, with Partha paints and Armory and the other brands that were out other than Citadel, you had to be very careful. You couldn't use a lot of the techniques that are out now. In fact, a lot of the techniques now only exist because paints like, especially Vallejo. Yes, this is Vallejo game color. You can tell by the little there. Vallejo, Army Painter, Scale 75, and other brands have really upped their game to let Games Workshop know they ain't the only game in town anymore. The end result was some techniques that used to be pretty much only available for people who used Citadel paints started being used by everybody. And then those techniques gave way to further techniques. And then still more techniques and refinements, variations. Somebody would come up with something that worked interestingly well for a given situation, and so it got used. My problem is, sometimes they get overused. For example, directional lighting. There are some people who paint with techniques to where instead of having notional light from straight above, straight down, straight down, they paint so that the light is coming from a specific angle. Now the problem I have with that is if it's in a scenario like a diorama, good. If it's part of an army, part of a tabletop troop, not so good. Because you end up with, as you move your troops, the light on each of your troops' direction is a totally different direction as you move them. You rotate this half of your unit to face the oncoming horde, and suddenly their light's coming from this way, whereas everybody else's light is coming from this way. The same thing happens with what's called non-metallic metal. Non-metallic metal is a technique for painting metal, obviously, whereby instead of using paints like, a silver, actual metallic style silver, you use shades of blue and gray to simulate the shimmer and shine of metal with lights and reflections pre-baked in. Now the problem is, if you've got an army moving across the field and you face two units come to face with each other, even if every one of your troops has the non-metallic metal lighting source and everything going from exactly the same direction with exactly the same reflection levels, the other guy, if he's using it also, he's got a totally different direction that it's coming from, totally different reflections. It really breaks the verisimilitude. It should really only belong in dioramas, where you're expecting to view it from a given angle with a given light source. That's where it shines. The same thing applies to another technique called image-based, image source lighting. There's other names for it. If it's something like, the science fiction guy with glowy bits on his armor, go ahead. But if it's like, if he paints his horn to be super glowy and then has a glowy shade on the sides of him facing that light, if it's not done subtly, it looks bad. If you overwhelm that image source lighting, it's not going to look good at all. Okay, it is 9 o'clock. Okay. Let's take a look and see if Beowulf is dry yet. Nope. See, the problem is with Beowulf, because I used both the flow improved water and the medium, it's going to take longer. What it is, I'm going to pull out a X-Acto here. Right now, right along the lines on either side of the belt on the back. In fact, let me go ahead and pull it in closer so you can see. Right along the lines of the belt, right in here, it's still damp. It's still wet. So I'm going ahead and letting it fully dry because I don't want to ruin it. Let me see here. Actually, I think it might be dry, just shiny. Yeah, adding in the flow improver and the medium does tend to make them a little bit shinier. Let me move him out of the way. A little bit more flesh wash. Let me put the cap back on so I can shake it. That looks like a lot of paint. That's only 3 drops. That's still more than enough to do what I need it to do. Now, first things first, I'm going to paint across the face. We're going to paint it in a very thin coat over the whole thing, and then I'm going to go back over in the areas that need it. I'm going to make sure that it's, sinking into those grooves and that. And at the bases where it meets like the belts in the front and the back. We don't want it to puddle, because if you puddle it, you'll get coffee stain rings. It's not as bad now as it was with some of those old-timey paints that I mentioned, but it is not something that we want to happen. Okay. Now, the next thing that we're going to be doing after this dries, because we've got to wait till it dries, we're going to be going back over with the same base paint, but not the mixed version. We're going back over with it straight from the bottle, and only a little bit of medium to try to get a nice, because but in addition to giving us some nice distinct lines in places like the hands and around the eyes, it's also staining the entire skin area a darker shade. And that's the main reason we're doing this, not for the sinking into the crevices and bit, although that is a bonus. We're doing it mostly to stain the skin tone. The exception to this would be in between the fingers, and that we really want it to go in there. As you can see, it's really simple to just pivot this around and hit every angle that we need to hit. And let's go back over here and let's make sure we get a decent amount inside the eye socket and around the mouth and on each ear. Okay. Now, while he dries, we can take a look at Roland. Okay, let me go ahead and bring him closer to you. Roland, as you can see, has mostly dried. So, what we're going to do now, we're going to get another wash. In this case, a dark tone wash. Dark tone kind of straddles the line between what Games Workshop calls Agrax Earthshade and what they call Nuln Oil. We're going to use just a tiny amount here. Just a teeny tiny, barely even a speck. I don't even think you can see it. I mean, go ahead and autofocus it again. Okay, you can see it. A teeny tiny dot. And all we're going to do is we're going to take it and we're going to put it in the eye sockets and the open mouth. Then we're going to rinse off the brush. We're going to wipe it like this. We want a damp brush for this, and we're going to just kind of that and suck it back up, because all we wanted that to do was stain that area. In fact, we can go ahead and put that back in the mouth, because we want that mouth to show that it's open. And I accidentally got some just outside the mouth, but all I gotta do is just wipe over it and it's gone. Maybe a little bit more in this. How about this? Let's just a little bit of this slightly watered down version just to soak in top of the eyelid. Okay. Now, to show you what it looks like now. Uh-oh. Okay. The mouth and the eye sockets are now a lot darker than they were. And we're going to be doing the same thing to Beowulf when he dries. Which actually it won't take as long for this wash to dry as it took for that last coat of the flesh tone. Anyway, this is what I use. Ignore the label. Ignore the label. This is what I use to mix, to thin down paint. What it is, it's just simply 6 parts distilled water, not regular water, distilled water, to 1 part vegetable glycerin. Yes, you heard right, vegetable glycerin. What that does, that breaks up the surface tension of the distilled water. And it means that when you go and you mix it with your paint and you then brush it on, it doesn't, the pigment settles to the bottom of your grooves and things like that, instead of resting at the top, on top of the surface where the surface tension is, leaving those coffee stain rings. It's also one of the reasons why I put a drop of dishwashing liquid. You can still see the foam around the rim in my brush washing water, because that little bit of, breaking the surface tension cleans the brushes so much better. I'm going to bring him here and let's focus on him. Yeah, there we go. And you'll notice I got a sleepy kitty here. Yeah, she's a baby girl. Anyway, so what's happening while this is drying? The areas to the top, let me go ahead and once again pull it in real close and autofocus it. Areas closest to the top actually are already lighter, because gravity is affecting the wash and it's pulling it down. One thing I really like about putting the lighting like this is you can easily see the details on the figure. The rough fur on the boots, the braids in the beard, etc. But the problem is, because it's not direct on lighting, you can't quite see some of the detailing on how the shade is working. We'll see that, when it comes time to actually photograph it, which probably won't be for another few days. I'll also say I won't show y'all everything I'm doing for the paint. It's just whatever I happen to be doing this next couple of weeks during my broadcasts. So, for example, these might be mostly done by the time I do Thursday's show. Oh, forgot to put that back. Now, when it comes to washes, there's 3 main kinds. The first is a pre-mixed wash. These guys are pre-mixed washes. They include, they have a thinner medium, they include a flow improver, and a different type of pigment, more of an ink pigment. The second kind is exactly that. Inks. Game Ink is one of the Vallejo brands of ink. If I painted this onto one of those figures right there, it would instantly stain it a brilliant emerald green. But it wouldn't act like a wash. Instead, an ink would need to be thinned down by probably the distilled water to actually act as a wash. But it would do so with a much thicker pigmentation possible. The last option is to actually use a paint. In this case, it would be cheating. This is translucent blue. Or they say transparent blue, it's a translucent blue. But you take it's the color paint that you want to be your shade, and you mix it with the distilled water and a little bit of the matte medium, and you would paint that on your model in the area, in the grooves and the areas where there's depression, that sort of thing. Soda. I drink at least as much soda during the 2 hours I broadcast as I drink the entire rest of the day. Okay, looking at Beowulf, he's still got quite a bit left to go at the seams, but the majority of him is already dry. And it's really looking nice and smooth with absolutely no brush strokes on him. Now, while we're waiting on him to dry, do y'all have any questions? Anything y'all want to hear or know about my particular preferred methods of painting? Yes, like and subscribe. But anything you want to know about painting? One thing you'll note, if I've been painting for a while, the back of my ring finger right here will start to get paint on it. Because I have this habit of sharpening my brush like that. Now, what's interesting, I've seen some unusual methods for holding the brush. I hold the brush like that. Pretty much the way I hold a pencil. I've seen one girl who holds it like this and paints it like that. Just sits there, and I'm not sure why. This is an older brush. This is one that would be mostly used for dry brushing. It's starting to split apart. This is a very, very fine brush. This would be used for like eyeballs. Okay, still got a little bit left to go. It's mostly done. It's just in the areas like deep under that underarm. Still a little bit of... We look on this guy, and he's dry. So what we can do, we look here, and since his face is dry, and his mouth is closed, take a tiny bit of this dark tone. Just like before. Not even a full drop. To get less than a full drop with one of these bottles, what you do, you place it very close to wherever you're placing it. Just a little bit. You get that, just a fraction of a droplet. There are channels out there that do miniature painting. I'm not going to name names. It's usually the same person on a couple different channels who uses a boatload of paint whenever he does anything. And it's like almost half of what he does is practically advertising for the paint companies, because he puts so much paint on his palette that it's just ridiculous. Okay. Now, when it comes time to actually do the eyes, I tend to do them at this point, because having put in the eye side, if I go outside the lines, I don't have a lot to fix. I also don't use pure white for the eyes. I use an off-white This particular off-white is, well, if it'll, mummy robes. Under that bright lighting it looks white, but it's not. Once again, always shake your paints until you can hear the agitator. My problem with using a hairdryer or a fan to speed up layer dry time is it doesn't do it a lot, but let's say I had a puddle, not puddle, but like a sink in here of wash. I blow dry it, it's going to get blown back. It's not going to completely be in where it's supposed to be. So I don't like it. I don't think it's a good idea. I mean, it's not a huge amount, but it happens. Once again, a teeny tiny little droplet, a partial droplet. Then, just first to get the brush wet, so I have flow control. And there you just saw me sharpening it. A little bit of the white. And just, once again, twist it as I put it on. I sit there. I paint the white first, then the black. And you start doing the motion across before you actually make contact with the figure. Because you're kind of like priming your hand for the motion. Okay. Now looking at it, I've gone too low on this side. However, fortunately, like I said, it's not yet time. Now, I use black for the eyes. Unless it's something large, like some of those giants up there, doing anything but black will not make it look good. Instead, it'll make it hard to see. It'll blur out the eyes. Once again, just a tiny partial drop. Not even a full squeeze, just enough to what drips out of the tip. And then okay. It's a good thing this is non-toxic paint. Okay. Okay. I did not like where that ended up, so I'm going to put a little bit of white back over top of it. Or not white, off-white. Now the reason why I did that is because if you get the eyeball in the wrong spot, or the iris, You can really make your figure look derpy. Then what I do, I'm going to go ahead and use a reddish brown. And again, with a teeny little droplet. Paint under the eye. Whoops. Number one, not too large. As long as you can hit it with water in time, you can get it off. Anyway. Number one, I got it in the wrong spot. Number two, that wasn't dark enough. Go really dark. Oak brown. There we go. Okay, bye-bye, Kim. Once again, teeny tiny little droplet. Just barely start to squeeze. Now, just a tiny amount. And under the eye. What will end up happening, since I'm doing it at this point, when it comes time to do the cheeks and the other higher altitude details, it will be covered up in the any excess I go across the top of the cheekbone, and it would be covered up by the actual next tier of painting. Okay. And since we're doing that, now it's time to go ahead and look to see if he's done. Okay, his eyes are dry. His underarm's not quite dry, but that won't matter because we're not going to be putting on another. So we're going to check this white. Just okay. Again, it's not fully white. Okay, and then the black. Okay. It doesn't matter if you can barely see any white left, because the truth is, the eye's in shadow anyway. Okay, and then A little bit of this underneath the eyes. Okay. In this case, a little bit above because this eye was a bit open too wide. Okay. Now the next thing we're going to do it on him first, is we break out the paint that we used as our base coat. We're going to use a full drop because it's going to be used on most of this area. We're going to do it again when it comes time for him. But for right now, we're just going to do this guy. We're then going to very carefully go over areas that we know. Also making certain that our brushes are are still a little damp. Basically what we're doing is we're making sure that only those areas that need to be shadowed have the shadow. Now on the hands, I do not do it to the fingers. I'm going to try and cover up the thumb, but I'm not touching the fingers yet. Can anyone tell me why? I should also note that right now I'm painting with a brush I normally use for dry brushing. Can you tell me why I don't touch the fingers yet? Why I leave them unpainted? Well, I don't touch them with this layer. Okay. Now, since this has a lot more space, what I can do is called wet blending. I put the paint on near the top of where I want it, and then wet the brush and paint with water towards the height. What's going to end up happening is this is going to help ease off. If you remember that diagram I drew, it's going to help ease off that jaggedness between the shadow and the between the shadow and the base color. It's going to kind of blend it in. That is something. This is a mid-tier technique. and you draw it towards the top of the draw it towards the top, because what ends up happening is you're pushing the pigment towards the top. Okay, now the face, I'm not going to do quite as much wet blending because there's not enough space to really pull it off. Okay. I'm going to put a little bit up here. Pardon me if I be quiet for a second. Sometimes I do that when I'm doing this because it's a little bit more concentration than doing sculpting. For one primary reason, there's no Control Z. There's no, oops, I screwed up, let me backspace. And because of that, if I totally mess up what's happening, the only option is to completely paint over what I just did, which is not always a possibility. Now, Beowulf here is going to end up being a little bit darker skinned than Roland would, except for the fact that I'm not actually going to have any skin besides the hands and face visible on Roland. So it won't be that clear that I've done this. But what the end result will be is Beowulf won't have as much highlighting. It won't go as high tone in the highlighting as Roland will. Okay. The advantage is, and now that I'm at this point, I do not need to wait for things to dry before moving on to the next. The reason being is because I'm painting with almost straight up paint, no thinning. Well, limited thinning. Okay. So just as, again, you probably won't be able to tell very well because the lighting is screwing it up, but he now has his next coat. Again, yeah, you're not going to be able to really tell this lighting. No, the reason is why I paint the fingers last. To minimize the chance of the shading between the fingers getting overwhelmed by an accidental brush stroke. I want the shading between the fingers to stay as sharp as possible to the very end. Okay, now that was this. Okay. So we then move up a shade. In this case, to Barbarian Flesh. Hush you. Meanwhile, he sings you. That's a sweet kid. Anyway. There we go. Now you notice just a single drop. And I was able to do the skin for both of these figures. I'm going to do the same thing here. Just a single drop, and not even really a full drop. Just most of one. The less paint you take out of these bottles, the better, because the longer they'll last. A 17 ml paint bottle will last a very long time if you're careful. Now, once again, let's get that brush wet, just to get the brush wet. And we're going to take this paint, and we're going to paint on here. Bring it up. And up here. Too watery. Now it looks very, very bright compared, but when we start doing our little wet blending, as it's called, it'll stop being quite as bright in comparison. Kind of just with a wet brush in. Just take care a little bit of what we're doing. Doesn't take very much at all. Of course, I remember when the most common paint bottles were either itty bitty or positively huge. And it was the good old-fashioned argument. A lot of paint for a high price, or a little paint for low. And neither one was really great in terms of the actual brand quality. Not compared to today. If you put Apple Barrel at a 1 and Citadel at a 9, I'd put Vallejo at a 9.5. I would find a perfect paint, that's why I don't say 10. But Vallejo at a 9.5. And Army Painter at a 7.5 to 8. And I would put all those paints from the 80s at about a 2.5 to 3. Okay. Now remember, like I said, what we're doing is we're putting the paint on the top of these muscles, and then we're going to water them a little bit directly onto the paint. It's like we're turning it into a glaze on the model. Okay. Just get a little bit in there. Then a little bit more water, and then wiping it off, just to blend this all together a little bit smoother. Okay. Then we're going to make sure that we get every bit that needs it. Because there's only because right now this is the top of most of the flesh. We go in too much higher than this, and it'll start looking less like flesh and more like a very badly airbrushed muscle suit for a superhero movie from the 90s. You know, like Steel or the original Spawn. And that doesn't look good. We want this to be skin, not airbrush. Okay, not too much longer. Now this is the point where on him I'll actually take care of the fingers. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead, I'm going to use this brush to dry brush. I really don't like doing that, but, oh yeah, not this brush. I need a dry brush to dry brush. And then just very lightly across where the fingers are. And across the back of the hand because of those knuckles and the tendons. And I'm going to need a little bit more of this for doing the face and hands on Roland. Okay. I also need to do Beowulf's face. So therefore we need a little bit more paint. If you think you hear a train, it might be the TV in the other room. My mother's watching various shows on TV while I do this. Okay, single paint, single drop. And we're going to bring it up. Only the top of the brows and the forehead will be this low. Okay. And then the tip of the nose, just once again, start brushing in the direction that we want the highlight to be. Top of the ear. And across the lip. And just a little bit more of the lighter on here. Because this neck is not coming out right. It's a little bit too dark there. A little bit too dark here. Bring that out. Okay. So. It's coming out pretty nicely. Once again, you probably won't be able to see it very well because of the lighting. But it's, you know, emphasizing those abs and emphasizing the musculature on the back. Okay. And now, that's all we need to do on the skin for Beowulf. We still have to do highlights in the skin for Roland. And again, he's going to be a little bit more pale than Beowulf, despite the fact that Beowulf's a Norseman. And Roland is a Frenchman. This is because this version of Beowulf spends a lot more time outdoors in less clothing, and Roland is normally covered head to toe in metal. And I don't know about you, but I don't think metal conducts UV rays very easily. Okay. So we're going to start off with this lighter shade. We're going to build up on the sides of the brow, sides of the forehead, and down to the brow. Okay, bring that down. A little bit on the upper lip. And then down the side of the mouth. And the cheekbones. On the top of the ears. And then the tops of the hands. and thumbs. And the same thing over on this side, top of the thumbs. And then I'm going to show you a trick. It's one that won't work on Beowulf for reasons that will become eminently clear. But it will work on Roland. I just am not sure if I should do it on him or not. Okay. There we go. And the next one is the final layer, which in this case, as you can see, is pale flesh. Rattle it until you can hear that rattle. Shake it till you can hear the rattle. An even tinier dot of paint. Okay. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to dry brush those fingers. And the tops of the hands. That helps distinguish the difference between the fingers and the tendons in the back of the hand. Now, one thing to remember when you're painting, always paint inside out. That means is from skin out. Like, you know, skin, then t-shirt, then dress shirt, then tie, then collar, then jacket. Go from the inside out. Once again, I'm going to get just a little bit of this here. And I'm going to paint just the brightest parts. And I screwed up there, so I got to be careful and get that off as soon as possible. Okay. And then just a little bit more on the tip of the nose, the tip of the cheekbones. And just the tip of the chin. Then a little bit of water on the, just dip it into that water and very carefully brush over what you just painted on. And then use this dryer brush to draw out okay. Now, we go ahead and rinse off all of these brushes, just one last swipe. Never push and squish the brush. Just swoosh and maybe brush against the sides. And then so kind of brush against the paper. Now you'll notice. Let me go ahead and move this out. Look how little paint I've actually used tonight, and I've done a significant amount of work on that much bare skin. You know, that's not very much paint to be used at all. Now, thing is, it's now 10 o'clock. I got the flesh done on both figures. And I mean done. Nicely shaded and everything. That really came out nicely on Beowulf. That's actually not surprising considering that his counterpart Grendel is probably my best painted giant so far. Go figure. So, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the camera. The spare camera. And to show you, what I basically have is, I printed out a bracket to hold the camera. So it was at about the right angle, aiming down at the tray table. So was that you, little baby girl? Yeah, look at this. Your little baby girl here. Anyway, so I got that done. And as you can see, it didn't use very much paint at all. You'll go in and you'll see some of these painting exclusive channels that they'll take something akin to, where did I put them? Yeah. Something akin to one of these. And they'll almost completely fill up this entire dimple with paint. And it's like ridiculous how much paint they're using to cover about the same amount of space that I covered tonight on Beowulf. Speaking of which, I need to put these. Okay. That came out really nice. Nice and smooth. Maybe not perfectly smooth, but definitely not stair-stepped too badly. Anyway, it is now 10:04. 10:04. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to hold up my hand. I promise to be the goofiest person I can think of when it comes time to be goofy, which is usually... Okay. In all seriousness, I'm going to hold up my hand. And I'm going to count down to... from 5 to 1. And when I hit number 1, I'm going to say something goofy and log out. Alrighty? So y'all have a wonderful evening. And I will see you again Thursday night. So that will be a 5, a 4, a 3, 2, and a 1. So if I tell dad jokes, but I'm not a father, yeah,